is one. Thank you. One of the longest endorsed RDA interest group, and they mainly focus on the issues related to certification, including but not limited to like data reservations, sustainability, and best practices. And the key point I want to point out, the certification group is not advocate the certification is the goal. Actually, the goal is to use the certification as a tool to improve the operations of the repository to be more trustworthy. So that's kind of what this group is about. And also this group is very productive. And one of the certification standard, the culture seal, is the result of the working group of this interest group. And also the trust principles. And it was developed within this working group a couple of years ago. And also getting a lot of popular, we'll probably talk about that. So before I go forward, and I think maybe we'd like to introduce the co-chair a little bit.
Hi, is this working?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Mickey Lindlar. I work for TIB, the Leibniz Information Center for Science and Technology, who's also the German National Subject Library for those subject fields. I'm rather new to the working group. I just joined last year. I come from an institution that's been gone through certification multiple times, total 4 times now. And one of my favorite pastimes is to whine on social media why research data management doesn't care more about digital preservation and certification, and that's how I ended up in this working group.
Yeah, welcome, Mickey, and also Mickey represent the European organizations. Meredith, can you hear us?
Yes, I hope you can hear me okay.
Yep, I can hear you.
Excellent, thank you. My apologies for not being there. I'm representing WDS, the World Data System, at the 27th session of the IODE committee at UNESCO in Paris this week. Some great things have come out of that, and I'm sure some of our Core Trust Seal colleagues will talk about that shortly. I'm the executive director of the International Program Office. We're engaged, WDS is engaged with we helped create, we took our certification along with another certification and supporting this for a long time. So grateful to be here, and I look forward to participating.
Okay, thanks Meredith. Let me move to the next slide. Okay, so this will be the agenda for this session, and so next I think we're going to probably run a little poll, just know the audience a little bit, and after that, and Ingrid and Simon will have an announcement of a new mechanism. Like we talked about interest group and working group, but maybe there's something more out there, and then we'll have a culture seal update. It will be given by John, the chair of the trust working group, the culture seal, and then we want to talk a little bit about the trust working group proposals. The trust have a lot of attention. I think with the paper is now probably 30 reads per day and 2 or 3 citations per month, but we want that to turn into actions, not just the tensions. I think that's kind of the working group that we're going to set up to push that thing forward, and then we'll have the discussions and see how what we're going to do with the working group, and then there'll be the closing, and hopefully Meredith can join us again. So that is the agenda. So now let me run through the. So I may need a little help here. So before they change the screen, I just wanted you to remember this link. We've also put out there on the Blackboard, and please sign up your name, and we want to know you and probably follow up with you. This Slido poll, I think we're trying to ask questions through the Slido if the technology enable us to do it, so then the online audience can participate as well. That will be the Slido link Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
And then the collective node is the using the bitline shortening. Oh, so where's the
Right, I
slide
show on
over?
the slide. All right. I shared the actual website.
Yeah, so the Slido number is not slide, the actual
This is
hole.
you will see it on it there.
Okay. No, this is the slide.
This is still
Yeah.
sort of system. So if you want to control slide, you have to do it from here.
No, I have like
This one's opening there.
but also there is a Slido. Can you create this?
Should I duplicate the screen and stuff?
This is a full screen. Okay, this. Yeah. Sorry.
This one is open. People will be able to join on the slide.
This?
Yeah, that's
Oh, this is
something
slide?
like that, yeah. So if people start sending questions, it will start showing up on the screen.
No, I think there's another Chrome, like I logged in.
Oh, but I think you did it from this one.
No, I think on this one.
Sorry.
Sorry guys.
Send
Oh yeah, this one, yeah. Can you do like present?
Yeah.
And okay. Okay, then can you where's the screen I cannot?
Do you want to go back to this one? Or it was this one as well? No, these are the same.
But did you upload your slides or?
No, this like if you click present,
It will bring.
can you and then do after this? Yeah, can you like
Alright,
yeah. So like
This both.
yeah, right. Okay, good.
Okay.
So what's the discipline areas? Yeah, so people can put in your information in. Okay, life sciences founder. You have 16 computer science, philosophy, information science, humanities, social sciences. Great. Domain agnostic. Wow. Right. You have the people coming in. Okay. The social science is winner for now. And information sciences. Okay, I have 40 people. I guess there's. Okay. They have more coming in. Digital preservation. Generalist. Okay. That's pretty good. I think this is like something like we want to see. It's like it's very diverse audience because the repository serve a lot of different communities. If you could help me to go to the next question.
I guess it's this one.
Yeah. Okay, so this is like see how many people like know what at what level of the understanding of the trust, like knows trust. Wow. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of people are not knowing details about trust principles, which is good. We're gonna have Mickey kind of introduce a little bit. and then hopefully they can help with the discussion. But I'm very impressed because like 1/5 that have read the paper. And I heard like a lot of people talk about there, like 95% of people have never read the paper. So we're much better up here. Like there's more. And also like there's a big component that from the organization have already endorsed trust. That's very encouraging. You have like some colleagues never heard of trust principles, which is perfectly fine.
Who took this survey?
What is that?
Where is this coming from?
Oh, it's a
The
poll.
code is over there.
If you slide over and then put the number in. I think the general trend is like we know about it now. Can you go to the next question, the last question? So how about cultural seal?
It's a competition.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh wow! Like now is a lot of people have already from a certified repository, but still attend the meeting. That's good. Yeah, I think also like the cultural seal, probably John will touch a little bit more. Is not a static standard. Is improving over time and with the community input. So that's good to see. And people know about details and have 59 people online. And there is also like a small percentage don't know cultural seal, so we're gonna learn something today. Yeah, I think that's probably like the things we want to see in the room. Maybe Jeremy, if you change it back to the presentation. Yeah, the next slide. Okay. So I give the floor to Simon and Gary.
Right. So, hi everyone. My name is Simon Salmer. I'm a research data management specialist at Downs. You can go to the previous slide. It's really nice to be here and meet you all. Today, me and my colleague Ingrid Gillow, whom most of you probably already know, wanted to very briefly introduce a new project called RDA Tiger and to pitch a new working group. So, in a nutshell, RDA Tiger is a 3-year project that launched in January this year that will facilitate and support working groups by running 6 pilots plus additional working groups that can apply for the selection committee that we're setting up. And the idea is to develop a service platform that will help support international alignment, including with various EOSC initiatives. And if you go to the next slide, the services that will be provided are essentially aimed to run the entire life cycle of a working group. So this includes communication and dissemination, both internally and externally. It includes facilitation, so partner engagement, work plan creation, and so on. Direct support through in-kind support or through output management and so on. Landscape awareness, continuous monitoring of the relevant landscape, and also finally an output and support maintenance structure that will be essentially include a technical platform that will be developed by my colleague Vin over here and his team, and essentially help to maintain the relevant information and outputs of the working groups. And with that, I would just like to hand over to Ingrid to present one of the first pilots of RDA Tiger.
Yep. And maybe also to repeat that it's very nice that there is now money coming from the European Union from the Commission to support not only European initiatives, but really to provide a suite of support services for working groups within RDA. So a number of those working groups have already been pre-selected during the proposal writing period of this project, but there will also be open calls in which it is possible for other working groups to apply for exactly the same support. Now, I want to say 3 sentences about one of those groups that has been already pre-selected, if I can have the next slide, because that is very much related to Core Trust Seal that we were already talking about. Core Trust Seal is a success as a certification mechanism, has its roots in RDA because it was the catalogue of requirements was created in a working group under the umbrella of this interest group. But it is very successful, which is great. But we also see that Core Trust Seal, which has a real focus on domain long-term repositories, we also see a lot of more generalist repositories knocking at Core Trust Seal's door. We also see technical service providers that provide services to repositories knock at the Core Trust Seal door. And we can't serve them all because the catalogue of requirements is not geared towards their needs. So there is now the possibility to create within RDA a working group around the definition of a set of requirements for technical service providers in order to make them compliant, so that repositories who make use of these platforms, of these service providers in terms of bit preservation, that you can use them and you can be sure that if they have a certain certification, that it is possible for you as a repository to certify your whole suite of services. So it is really the technical basis for a repository. So with this pitch, we would like to invite people who are interested in joining this working group that we're going to set up. To make yourselves known, to give us, send us an email or send it to the person you see on the slide there, to Nijla, who is very much involved in RDA Tiger, or to me, or to Simon. Make yourselves known. We are setting up this group and we can use all the support that there is and the intellect that we have in this international community. And it's good to know that this group will receive real support, so it will really produce an output in 18 months. And you don't have to do all the writing yourselves, we just need to pick your brains. Thank you very much. There is member number 1, and my dear friend. And it was 10 years ago that we were sitting outside of the rooms, on the floor, in the corridor. We set up this interest group that led to Core Trust Seal. So let's do it again. Thank you.
Thanks.
Very nice.
Yeah, thanks, Ingrid and Simon for presenting the new opportunities. I think that's the actions that we want to see, right? Continue to improve the trustworthy repository ecosystem. And I should also mention that if you follow that short link, and then there was also a sign up sheet. And if you want to join the Tiger working group, and then you can put yes there. It's also, I think, the same for the trust working group. It's not necessarily you commit yourself for now. I think we submit the proposal for trust working group. It still need to be approved. But for now, I think you can show your interest. So if you sign up, make sure to check out that column. So then, John, are you ready?
See if I can operate this equipment so everyone could hear out in the greater world now. It's so good to see such a wide range of folks when we look at all the disciplines up there. It makes me feel good that we got a very inclusive group. Also makes me feel good that social science and information science were the biggest letters there, since that's the world I come from. A shameless plug. I am from the Odom Institute at UNC Chapel Hill, and we're a social science data repository there, and we manage those social science data there, and been working with many groups, including RDA, for many years. Since over half this group already know about Core Trust Seal, I may go fairly fast through some of these slides early on because most of you know some of those.
Can you sit there if you like?
That's perfect. All right, thank you. So where do we fit into this world of certification and standards? Where does Core Trust Seal fit? So we have to think back a little ways. Before there were things, even before the beginnings of Core Trust Seal, how did repositories show their trust? Did we just trust them because we knew them? Did we just know they trust? Well, we've been looking for that. The information science world has been looking for that solution for a long time. And it starts with a set of principles, potentially, like the trust principles. But you could do at one time we did Drambora, for example, which was a evaluation, a risk-based evaluation of your repository. We went through those things, and then in the US there was a TRACS movement, and then we saw all sorts of different methods. The Nestor came about, and then we had an international standard, and they have this range that ranges all the way from I just look at what I do and match a set of principles, and I can tell my customers that I'm trustworthy, all the way to the highest level standard here, which would be the ISO standard, that you go through a very laborious paid review that is an ongoing process, a very heavy process. So somewhere in the middle of that, you have the Core Trust Seal, which is the core. It's the base core of all of these things. It's meant to allow someone to show that they are trustworthy, right? So the phrase that I often hear is trust but verify. You can say you're trustworthy, but how do you verify that? How do we verify that as we go through? So where did Core Trust Seal start and why we're doing it? We're for everyone. We're for the data producers, the funding bodies, consumers, data repositories. It helps everyone in this community. And the objective is to preserve the data for the long term. So it's a very strong link with FAIR. FAIR, as Dalia was saying, is a very popular term these days. But if you want FAIR over time, you need a trusted repository to be sure it stays FAIR over time, that there's someone managing those data over time, that they don't become obsolete, that all the surrogates are managed appropriately. So that's what we're looking at, is how do you manage these things over time? And we want those to be reliable and accessible and all the things in FAIR, but that is over time. So Ingrid mentioned earlier, it started literally here, where Core Trust Seal came from. Many of us, my repository was a data seal approval repository, and this combination with the World Data Systems got together with RDA and the great work that RDA does, and out came the Core Trust Seal. And that was a lot of hard work, and I want to applaud the folks that started this, because this was something that is not easily done. How do you look at two different standards and lots of standards and make a decision on what is core across multiple disciplines, right? What is the same core values, the same core needs for someone in a social science archive as someone for a geosciences archive? So that's a difficult task. And I think that the way to do that is collaborate and work through RDA. And I'm excited about this new project that Ingrid was talking about, the Tiger project. So governance, what is Core Trust Seal? A little information about Core Trust Seal. It is a community-led, peer-led organization. It is almost entirely volunteer through the entire services. Everyone you see here, with the exception of some of the secretariat, are all volunteers. We all do this for the gracious of our hearts, because we love RDA and we love this method. I will have to give a quick plug. We're going to be looking for new members for this board very, very soon. The members actually come from the assembly of reviewers. So this is a peer review type of system. So when you submit your application, people who have already come before you that are already certified, they volunteer to review those 16 or more, 16 actual requirements, but there's an R0 that I think is super important, so really 17. But they look at those requirements and judge them based upon their own experiences. And the board comes from this list of reviewers. So the first step is become a reviewer, and we always need help in that. And there's some more information on all the governments and rules and procedures that are all published here. So the idea here is that it's domain agnostic, it's global, it is about the core. All we think about is this core. Disciplines can build on top of Core Trust Seal. They can add additional requirements for certain disciplines, but all disciplines need this basic core. If they want to run a repository that's trustworthy, they will have to do these core. And there's lots of mappings ongoing about how you map Core Trust Seal and all these other standards to themselves, but there is a core there that we all agree that we really have to do, and that's what this is about. And of course, it was very community-based. It is a nonprofit. Everyone is a volunteer basis, and it is domain agnostic. So how does this happen? So it's really a multiple step thing here. I mentioned it's a peer review, but you do a self-assessment first. You go online, you look at the 16 requirements, you go look at the published requirements, the published reviews from other people. So once you become certified, these are very transparent. They're on the internet. You can go on and see everyone else who's been certified and all of their responses. You can look at those. One of the really major recommendations we have is to also go look for someone similar to you. Find another social science archive, find another archive similar. There's lots of groups that have come before you. Find one online. See what they answered, see if you align with them the best. Once you've done that self-assessment, 2 other peers that are assigned to those things that are anonymous to you, take a look at those and give you comments and feedback. And it is a back and forth process. The idea is to make things better. It's not just to get certification, but the idea is to make your repository better. And we want the data preserved better, and that's why we go through these processes. So after these experts take a look at it, then the board has the final approval of that. We want to have some consistency between all of these applications. So there's a final process where the board puts a stamp of approval. They're only valid for 3 years. There's a minimal cost of €1,000 for those 3 years. And everything's public, as I mentioned before. So this 3-year revision cycle, we know that things change rapidly in the world of data repositories and things that you must need to do to be trustworthy. So we want to be sure that that we have a low barrier to entry, but we want to be sure that we constantly revise those things. And we just completed a review for the current requirements that just started the first of this year. We actually have a new AMT tool that's working fabulous. People really like to submit these applications to it. But we went to the community and asked them what things need to be changed. We looked at all the comments over 3 years because all these comments are saved in the applications. We went through and found all the challenges and the things that that needed to be changed for this new version. And then we did a survey of those, sent it out to the community. The community took a look at all the changes that were suggested, and over 78% agreed with the proposed changes. And a little bit later, I think it's the last slide, we'll talk about the next step for these changes is that we created a maintenance group, an RDA maintenance group that will begin meeting in October in Austria to talk more about future changes and how RDA can help control some of these and manage some of these. There were not only a handful of substantive changes within the categories, the numbers moved around some. So what used to be, for example, a R8 might not be an R8 now, it might be down in R14 requirements though. So be careful as you look at the new requirements because they've been moved around some. And some have been combined. Some of this came from the community that has said, look, it doesn't make sense to have these separate, we need to put them together. So we saw that many times people made mistakes in their initial applications and we want to speed that process up. So we've combined some of these things. Another thing, major change are the compliance levels. We used to have a 0 to 4 type compliance level here. We changed it to simplify the process here. Either you've implemented it or you're in progress. And if you're in progress, you've got to explain what your steps are and put comments there. So those compliance levels were changed a bit in order to streamline the process and remove some confusion. We had a lot of confusion around some of those compliance levels, especially the non-applicable one. Quite often people would say things are non-applicable when in fact they almost always are applicable in some fashion. So a few things we've added recently is we've added a triage process. So before those peer reviewers take a look at that, we have a consistency officer take a look at those applications to be sure that they're in scope. As Ingrid mentioned, we're getting a wide range of applications from many, many groups, and we're trying to speed this process up so that the applicant or Core Trustee don't spend months in the process of figuring out that that is not a good fit. So we want to do that early. So we do this triage process and do that very quickly and get it back. And we're looking on pushing forward with an idea of levels of preservation and how active versus passive preservation and things like this new Tiger RDA group is going to be looking at how you categorize these types of things. So we're very interested in that, and there's a link here to a paper in Zenodo we'd love to get comments on as well. So we also made some changes to the update of the background of your repository. We wanted to be sure that you were able to explain exactly the information that lets the reviewers know where your repository sits in the world and the things, whether it's a specialist repository, whether it's a generalist repository, and explain the background information. Since you don't have an on-site visit like in an ISO certification, you really need to give the peer reviewers some background. It helps in order for them to learn how you operate and be able to review you appropriately. So some of the typical changes are things like structural changes I mentioned before, move things around, terminology change, very minor things. We included some things to make it a little more clear. The clarity was very important to make sure people understood which response for evidence goes in which block. And it was a lot of confusion there. So we did a little infrastructure changing to do that. And we also wanted to align with the current changes in infrastructure that's going on. So this is a last slide, but I wanted to also mention that we have a maintenance working group now that's spinning up. We have not announced it yet. This is a new working group, and now we'll start looking at how we can coordinate within RDA to do the future changes, to do things like board elections. That'll be coming up next year. As I mentioned earlier, we need to start building a community. It's a volunteer community, it's a peer community. So we always need new and fresh people with fresh ideas. So we'd love to see that coming. Here's several of the links to those papers I talked about. And other than that, I'll turn it over to Daiwei. Do you want to do questions now or later?
Yeah, I think we have turn on the microphone. I think we have time for some questions. And then actually feel free to put the question into the Slido. Maybe I will just kind of one question in the Slido, and I'll start with and people can put your question in, and including the online audience. So is there any tutorial on how to apply Cultural Seal certification?
Yes, there's we have a YouTube channel with lots of training videos that are this new. We broke them down into individual requirements. There's training videos there. There's a lot of help in the community. This is a very close community. I look around the room and I see Core Trustee people all dotted all through here. So I'll rely on them for some more answers as well, but there's lots of really good training material out there, as well as those applications that are public as well.
And the next question is, what qualifications are needed to be a reviewer?
So you have to be from a certified Core Trustee repository. So the first thing you do is get your repository certified. And once you've gone through that process, then you are nominated from your group to the Core Trustee. We're always looking for folks. So if you are one of those, I think they said almost 40% of the room were from certified repositories. If you're not in the review process now, we welcome you there.
So do the requirement change depend on whether the repository is a generalist or the specialist?
They're the exact same across the board. So this is where that active versus passive preservation comes on board. And many of the other board members I see in the room were welcome to speak up here as well. But one challenge with a lot of the generous repositories is if you have a self-deposit mechanism where any researcher can upload that data, there's no active curation, decisions aren't made of whether these file formats are good or whether they're preservable. There's that active preservation is important, especially from the realm that we come from, because most of us come from a disciplinary-based repository, that we look at those and make sure they can be used 5 and 10 years down the road. That doesn't mean that you can't do that. If you're a generous repository and you have the staff and you have the expertise that you can have processes and procedures to go through those, being sure that all of those things are in and they are curated, that is active preservation. So it is a fine line there. You cannot say that all generous repositories don't work. Some do. There are many that do get Core Trust Seal certification and do have active preservation. They have workflows and policies that curate their data, and they can be trustworthy. There are also some that allow self-deposit with no control, minimal metadata, and those things over time are not trustworthy. They may be trustworthy the day they're put in there, but next year, next month, 5 years, they may not be trustworthy. And that's something that we look over time for doing.
Yeah, maybe I'll take 2 more questions from Slido, and then we can move on, and we can continue to talk about the cultural seal in the discussion session. So this is one on the top now. To aid preparation for recertification, is the mapping from the old standards to the new structure available online anywhere?
Yes, if you go to the Core Trust Seal website, there's a link, it's published in Zenodo, that have all the change logs between the old and the new are there, as well as the new. And the extended guidance was changed. And I highly recommend people look at the extended guidance. Quite often we have people submitting an application and they never looked at the extended guidance. Very good. That has lots of good tips in the bottom, not only for reviewers, but also for applicants.
Okay. Then this is a really good question. How do you ensure that the reviewers interpret the criteria the same way?
So anytime you have a peer review type of plan, whether it be a journal peer review or you have a certification as we do, you run into that issue. So that's almost a double-edged sword, right? You almost don't want them to see eye to eye. If they see the same thing, they're never going to catch the same things. The perspective of the reviewers is important. It's really good to have a perspective of a reviewer, for example, that's a technical point of view. They really hone in on all the technical things, while you have someone else that looks at the policies for the organization. So I would say that it's a benefit to have variety in these reviewers, right? But there is a negative. How do you know that you don't pair up 2 that have don't have a good perspective together and they're not consistent across the applications? That's why that we have a new consistency officer taking a look at some of these applications, and also why the board itself reviews all of these for consistency. Quite often we see this where the reviewers haven't been consistent with other applications that have been certified. So we look at that as a board, and that's the final check, is the board.
Yeah, so John, since we have a cultural seal and trust principle, like people in the same room, do you want to give a brief comments about the relationship between the two?
Absolutely. So we all have principles, not fair principles, trust principles. As individuals, we have principles, but how do we demonstrate these principles, right? In our human lives, we do that by our actions, how people see us, and how we are shown in the community, the things we do, the activism we do in the community, the things we volunteer for. So the idea here is you may have principles, but you must show those. You have to verify that you actually do that. You have to do something. You can't just endorse a set of principles. Trust principles are really good because they give you a framework to start thinking about trustworthiness. But the difference is Core Trust Seal gives you a way, or any of these certification methods, give you a way to demonstrate that trust and have a third party show that you've actually been following through with the transparency and the responsibility, and it shows how you do those, rather than signing on to a set of trust principles. It's very, very good to have these trust principles, but there are many ways that we can demonstrate that trust. And it could be with the Core Trust Seal. We're a good community that we think is very good, but you could also use the Nestor or ISO 16363 ways to demonstrate those trusts. There are many other trust ways around the community, but the idea here is that trusts are the actual principles that we live by, but we have to demonstrate those in the real world somehow.
Great, yeah, thanks for the great comments.
I would like to make a short comment for
Sure,
the colleagues. Maybe it works naturally.
Yeah.
I have had the occasion to make workshops with the old version of the criteria and the new guidance. And I would like to tell the colleagues who have not yet looked at the new guidance that it is really clearer and easier to use. So don't hesitate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so
And
much.
thanks to those who have done this huge work.
Okay, so thanks, this one. And then now we'll move to the trust principles and take away.
This is a bit hard to follow. I'll also be a little bit like preaching to the converted, right? But so let's focus on two takeaway goals. We all heard why we need Core Trust Seal certification. Why do we then need trust? I think one thing is, for those who already know why certification is important, you can use trust as a marketing thing or as something to get the conversation going. Every time someone says, is your data fair, you should ask, are your services following trust principles? And you have an easy image to go with it, right? And if Core Trust Seal was too much for you, maybe trust will get you interested in Core Trust Seal. So let's take a step back and briefly cover what the trust principles actually are. What does the acronym resolves to? The T stands for transparency, and what we mean by that is that you should be transparent about your repository services that you have and about your data holdings. Classically, you do that through documentation, and different certification frameworks will go into specific requirements of what kind of documentation you need to have publicly available to be able to be certified. The R stands for responsibility. Take responsibility for your actions, for ensuring authenticity and integrity of the digital data. And again, the certification frameworks will put very large focus on that, where you prove authenticity and integrity in your deposit interface, also in your access interface, how you ensure that that is maintained over the course of actions within your repository. So you need to take responsibility for that, but also for the reliability and for the persistence of your service, right? What happens if you upgrade your repository, if you move to a different kind of platform, to different software? What happens to the data holdings that you have within your infrastructural services? The U stands for user focus, which is a much nicer way to frame it as opposed to the digital preservation or designated community. So you need to ask yourself, who are you doing it for? What is your target audience? Your target audience on the access side, also on the deposit side. And based on knowing that, what kind of data management norms do you need to adapt and follow? What are the expectations of those communities? The S then stands for sustainability. Again, not only sustainability of the data, that should be a no-brainer when you talk about trustworthy repositories, but also the sustainability of your service. Every certification framework will ask you what happens if you're no longer around, right? What's your successor for your institution? What will happen to the data? And those are crucial things to define from the beginning, and they're very important to communicate to your stakeholders, to those who put trust in you taking care of their data. And lastly, the T stands for technology. It's your responsibility to provide the infrastructure and the capabilities to support secure, persistent, and reliable services. And you need to have adequate measures in place to do that. So that's a very brief overview of what trust actually stands for. What has happened so far? Like I said in the beginning, in 2020, the original trust principles were formulated and published. They are heavily in use. If you're amongst the few who haven't read the paper yet, I invite you to do that. They will go in much further detail into what is actually behind the trust principles. Since then, there have been various endorsements. I myself was involved in the Nestor Ad Hoc Working Group. Nestor is the German Competence Center for Digital Preservation. And we took a look at it from a very digital preservation point of view, actually had some criticisms about the trust principles where we think that very strict preservation actions are not embedded as strongly enough in it. And we had the fear that trust would be misinterpreted as being another certification framework. But we managed to clarify that mainly through discussions at the last two plenaries where all different kind of certification bodies were invited to give feedback to the trust principles, to present on what it is they do. And we had a lot of productive discussion about ideas of how we can move forward with trust in those sessions. Today, we have 42 endorsements of the trust principles on the RDA website, and those endorsements come from a wide variety of different institutions. They come from research institutions, they come from gallery, libraries, archives, and museums, they come from certification bodies like CoreTrustSeal themselves, and they also come from data interest groups like the Open Preservation Foundation, for example, but also from publishers like Springer. And most recently, as has been mentioned before, we handed in the working group case statement, and that is awaiting review and endorsement. And what we are planning to do in that working group, I would like to highlight now. Sorry, I was ahead of myself. First, I want to remind you why we actually need trust, right? One thing is that data loss is real. It's something that's usually talked about during coffee breaks and not so much in sessions, but it does happen. It happens all the time. For those who don't know the publication shown in the image, it's about an analysis that was done about vanishing open access journals, and those are simple publications, right? So if it's so hard to maintain simple publications, what does that say about the long-term availability of the research data behind it? So even if you look at what you might consider long-established repositories and platforms, they will lose data. Everybody loses data. But what can I do to actually realize that I'm losing data? And what can I do to mitigate the risk? As a research data management community, we put high focus on reproducible, reliable data, but how reliable are the services that we actually use to take care of that data, right? And we should put as much effort and as much passion into that question as we do into FAIR objects. And speaking of FAIR is great, but it deals mainly with properties of the digital object. In the same way, CARE is great, but CARE mainly deals with the ethics and the community around it. And trust tries to close that gap. Trust wants to focus on the infrastructure. It also wants to mitigate the fact that trustworthy digital repository certification, like CoreTrustSeal, is often considered too complex, too much work, and not for us because, I hear that a lot. It's not for us because we're an archive, everybody trusts us. It's not for us because we only keep our data for 10 years. It's not for us because we don't have simply the resources to do that. And every time you hear that, you should point to the trust principles, and they could be used as a first guidance to adopt trustworthy repository best practice. John said that CTS is verified trust, so this will probably be not verified trust, but maybe curiosity about trust or trustworthiness and getting started in that journey. So then what is next? Within the working group, we want to first look at trust adoption for the principles. We want to understand what a hindrance is, like we would like to but, right? What is the but? What's your but and why? How can we help you actually get the point across in your institution, in your organization, that you should worry about these things and that you should move towards certification or at least towards the trust principles in a lived way. We want to show how the trust principles are connected to specific implementation commonalities, but also how the hindrances are possibly connected to specific implementation commonalities, right? Are there specific groups that will have a common reasoning for why trust is not important for them? And what does that mean for our description of the principles? We want to understand how we can improve the understandability and through that the usability of the trust principles for the wider community. Like I already said, we also want to clarify the relationship between trust and care principles, trust and FAIR principles, and trust and certification frameworks. They all do deal with different ends of the spectrum, but there is a specific overlap, and we want to be very clear to show how those connect, and that it's not one or the other, but that it's a joint big picture that you should use within your services that you offer. And for certification, we want to collect and analyze case studies for trustworthy repository examples to drive commonalities across them, and through those then map how trust principles can link to existing certification instruments. So that's looking at it from the other way around. The goal is, of course, that this should enable then people who look at the trust principles to move forward from there and understand how MIT maps to core trust seal criteria or to Nestor seal criteria and so forth. Like what documentation is required for transparency. We want to, of course, do that, like I said, not to replace those certification instruments, but to improve understanding of what they are and also help you make a better point within your institutions as you want to get the case across of why trustworthiness is important to prove. And we want to develop use cases showing how repositories then move from trust towards certification. And how can you get involved? You can give feedback to the working group case statement under this link. It's also in the session notes. It's possible to do so until April 7th, and I'd like to invite everyone to do so. You can contact Meredith, Devi, or myself if you would like to be added to the group communication channels. We've already set up a meeting frequency for it. We will be meeting the second Thursday of every month at 1700 UTC. And of course, it'd be great if you could all participate in the discussion in the next minutes, because that will greatly help us in developing the trust principles as well. Thank you.
So, okay, before I get to the comments, I saw like a lot of people already go to the link and sign up for the trust, show the interest of trust working group and Tiger working group. That's great. Keep on doing that. And there is some also the reference. I think that still need help. And for the next probably 30 minutes, we really want to hear from you, like for the trust working group, like what are missing, right? And what is the things that this working group will do? So this working group is not officially approved. Some of the application already has a review process to see if there is enough interest to do it. So today's like if you sign up, that great way to show interest. And then also I think the ideas that we need from you to enhance the proposal. So there's a couple comments in the room.
Thank you. It's just that
Claudia, if you can say your name and.
You want? Oh no. Okay. I'm Claudia Balza-Medeiros from Brazil and RDA Council, and I was just wondering about 2 slides before an English language nuance that made me wonder exactly what you mean. There. Okay. Relationship between why trust to care and trust to fair. Okay, what does to mean there? It's one directional. Why not and why to?
And maybe I'll take that.
Oh, it should be and. Oh, I thought you meant something specific.
That's actually a language mistake on my
Oh,
Thanks for pointing that out.
I thought it meant something specific.
No, it was a German brain mistake.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I think that's a good point. I think if the back can hear me, I think there is a microphone here that can access to the online audience. I think that's actually a great point, Claudia. I think we have been talking about like with other principles, like fair principles, trust principles, and care principles. They really kind of address the key issues about maximizing the research data in different perspectives. So I think that's what we want to see, if like to collaborate with the different principles that have a stronger message. Francois?
Yes, François Genova from Strasbourg Astronomical Observatory. I would like to suggest that since it is possible to join the group already, you use the mailing list of the group as a communications channel rather than asking people to go to Meredith or other people and creating still another communication channel. Because when people are interested can join the group and then you send the message to the mailing list of the group.
Yes, I think the mailing list of the group was on there as well, on the slide.
Yes,
But yes,
but you say that if you are interested,
Yes.
we have to send a message to the chairs. And I have a feeling it's a bit duplicating things because you will have two mailing lists in here.
yes, you're absolutely right.
Would you mind pass on to Jeremy? And then,
Thank you, Jeremy Yeeling from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And I also had a question, in a way referring to the slide that Claudia also referred to. Just specifically the connection between trust and certification frameworks, I think it was said. So, funders have been kind of talking about the FAIR principles for quite some time, and it's been a good way to raise awareness and so on. And now, at least in Canada, starting to think a bit more about implementing the FAIR principles. You get into kind of different territory than what you would find on the FAIR website. So you start thinking about, peer review and what you're asking of reviewers, what you're asking of applicants, and what you're asking them to do with their data. And, using like data availability statements or so on. So when it comes to kind of trust and let's say after you've raised awareness of trust, when you move to try and compel or require repositories that you fund to implement them, are the certification frameworks kind of like the best way to kind of point these repositories towards how to kind of conceptualize or create a plan on how to actually implement them? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think. I think a quick comment on that is that I wouldn't say like cultural seal the best way to implement trust principles. I think it's like one approach to ensure trustworthiness, and I think right now cultural seal is the most popular one, right? Like I think that and also it's a community based, and so like as a funding agency like from NIH, we're not going to say mandate a repository to get certified, but we encourage them. Like in the funding opportunity, we mentioned that that we kind of encourage people to adopt the community-based standards like cultural seal, right? And ISO and other like next.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. It wasn't so much about recommending a certain certification framework, but more in the terms of like for example, if you include in like an RFP or a request for applications that the data should be fair, people are going to interpret that in all different ways, and you need like specific guidance. So likewise, if, for example, if a funder started telling its repositories that it funds that they should be trustworthy, I guess that's the way. And they said, like, well, how do we do that? Pointing them towards one of the certification frameworks. Is that like a really good kind of first step to help them kind of conceive how to go about achieving that level of trustworthiness?
I think so. I think for a funder to institution relationship, it clearly is, and a lot of funding bodies already do that. At least the DFG in Germany already does that.
Okay, I'm Kevin Ashley from the Digital Curation Centre. And I must admit, part of the reason I've come to this session is I've looked at the case statement for the group that's open for comment. And I had quite a lot of questions about it, and I thought perhaps the best way to get those sorted out was to come here. I'm still struggling to understand, perhaps, it's not that I see any issue with the trust principles as such, but I don't fully understand if this group is formed and does these investigations into the relationship between the trust principles and other things, what's going to change in the world as a result of that? I'm not quite sure what in a sense, what the ultimate goal is. The goal of the group to study the relationship between one set of things and another set of things is fine, but I'm not, other than an intellectual exercise, I'm not quite sure what the benefit is.
I think Levi and I could answer that probably differently.
Yeah,
We've been
yeah.
discussing this a lot. To me personally, I think my key outcome of the working group is to make the trust principles better known and better understood by the community. And if we can even get a sliver of the success that FAIR has gotten, it's implemented and mentioned everywhere. And I'd be happy from a preservation point of view if trust principles were mentioned even as, in every 20th presentation. And to me, that'd be a huge success. And to me personally, and to my institution, that's the key expected outcome of the working group.
Yeah. And I would add on to that is I think the things at least I hope to change is like there are some repositories and say, I endorse trust principles, right? And then they put the endorsement there and people thinking they're trustworthy. And so I think we want to kind of make that clarification, like the endorsement is agreement, is not action, right? So that's, I think, the one thing that we want to see, and also like the researchers will understand and funders will understand that as well, right? But also, I think more importantly, I hope that trust principles can also encourage collaborations. Like I think there was a working group session in this room, like in the morning about attributes of repositories, for example, right? And they approach the repository operation from different perspective. But what if, like, say, if you say, this attributes are really talking about transparency, and maybe that some requirements for cultural seal really talk about transparency, and are we reached to a level that the community understand that transparency is important. So I think that may like using the trust framework to facilitate like dialogues, and that's I think what hopefully like the working group will be able to work out some message that people can follow.
So both the things you've said there are great and fine, and I don't have an issue with them. I still don't quite understand how that group.
Okay, sorry, I'll just repeat what I said then. What you both said is all sounds fine. Raising awareness and trust, absolutely, I understand that. That'd be a good thing to, and you described as well. But I still don't. I'm not sure I can connect that description of a working group with those aims, and it strikes me that there may be other ways to achieve the aims you've described,
yeah,
which in and of themselves are good ones.
Yeah, I think that's fair comment, and hopefully join our working group, and then we can figure out the ways.
And I think to maybe add on that, it was mentioned before that for FAIR objects, the FAIR principles are formulated first, and we're now at a point we're trying to make them actionable. I think for the trust principles, the action's already there. We look at the certification frameworks. Yeah. So the working group's actually a linking exercise between the certification frameworks and the trust principles, and to showcase then people in the next step, once they've gotten interested in trust, of how to move to the next step.
Yeah. So I gave the microphone to Ingrid. Maybe after that, we'll see if there's online, the comments from online audience.
Yeah. I want to follow up on what Kevin just said and play devil's advocate and maybe make it even worse, because we are all good people in this room and we know about trust and core trust seal and the detailed differences. But isn't there also a danger that organizations think we will just endorse the trust principles and then we can say that we are a trustworthy repository? Yeah. So that you get the opposite effect from what you really intend to achieve?
Yeah, I think, but I think that would be the same issues that for FAIR principle, right? I think that the organization endorse.
Yeah, but that's an issue at the moment.
Yeah, but I think Mickey's point is good. Like, I mean, for trust, you already have a framework for 20 years, right? Have this certification standards that you can follow. And if the funding agencies that could really, like, say, care or maybe really serious about the invest in a repository that they need to be trustworthy. They may be like, that will be, for the repository to demonstrate that. And then there's a lot of, there's probably half a dozen repositories that they get NIH funding for like 20 some years. They don't have to have a seal to prove their value, but now they're getting the cultural seal, and as a way to kind of demonstrate their commitment to the community.
But Ingrid, I'm 100% with you, and that was one of the key points that with the Nestor ad hoc working group, we actually criticized in the trust principles. And to me, that was one of the biggest motivations of joining this working group, to ensure that that wouldn't happen. And I think through linking and clearly stating over and over again that those are principles, and that the actionable items are certification frameworks, and this is how they map, we can achieve that. To me, that's the smartest way to do that, because the principles are already out there, right? And I think they're a good communication tool.
So maybe before that, we'll see if we can like move to online to see if there's comments coming from the online audience.
Yes, okay, so just to tie into this, I'm from the Australian Research Data Commons. We don't run a data repository, but we care an awful lot about data repositories in Australia and more broadly. And we were really happy with the trust principles because we were already encouraging repositories to get Quartile Seal certification. But we ourselves could never get Quartile Seal certification. It's just not relevant to us. But having the trust principles meant there was something we could stand behind and say we actually endorse the trust principles, and we're already encouraging repositories to get CTS certification. So for an organisation that is not a data repository, the trust principles are actually really useful, and that's something we can support and endorse. So I think the trust principles have their place, and Quartile Seal certification has its place. I think you're very lucky that you're working the other way around than the FAIR principles. So you've started with various certification mechanisms, and then you build principles on top of it. But to be honest, I don't think there's a lot of connection needed there. I think it's reasonably obvious. I think promotion is very important, yes. I think that's very important to promote the trust principles and be clear about what the trust principles are, especially that the trust principles are about repositories and they're not about trusted research, because we get some confusion around that sometimes. But otherwise, I think that I'm very happy with the trust principles. I'm very happy with Quartile Seal certification, and I think just clarifying the connections between the two is important.
The linkage is actually to take place on the granularity of the criterion level. So to showcase how the trust principles are represented in the, 16 co-trust seal criteria, 34 Nestor criteria, 105 ISO criteria.
Okay, any comments from on the online audience? If not, we can go to the, I saw a lot of questions accumulated on Slido. We can go through those.
Go to Slido?
No, I think I was waiting to see if there is people online like want to say something.
There are 2 questions in the chat.
Yeah, maybe we kind of go through the question about, I think I guess Ingrid and Sema, I think that question probably is related to you guys, right? Like you mentioned the CTS for technical providers. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I think the answer to the first part of the question, Philippe, is yes, and to the second, I'm not so sure, but it's very much also up to the group to define the breadth and the focus, etc. But my first intention would be to say that the first half is a yes and the second half is a no.
Okay. And then the link to slide, we'll probably put into the same document after this session. And then, John, would you want to take the next question? Can you speak to the applicability of?
Yeah, and I think that Ingrid and Irvin and several others could jump in here as well. This relates back to Philippe's question. Yes.
Can you repeat the question so that it gets
Absolutely.
recorded, okay?
So the question was, can you speak to the applicability of Quartile Seal and trust to services that interoperate with repositories which do not store or preserve data long-term? So to me, this question begs that someone does a portion of the core trust seal. It does a portion of this curation process, right? It could be a tool or a service, or it could be a person, right? There's people that do things along the curation process as well. So it's very similar to Philippe's question. You could use, I'm a Dataverse person, I've been using Dataverse for many years. You can use Dataverse in many, many different ways. You can use it for a core trust seal certified repository that you have wrapped workflows around Dataverse. Dataverse does some things right out of the box. It creates surrogates, you can have replicas in it, it has good metadata, it has a lot of the searchability. It solves a lot of the things in core trust seal, but it doesn't solve them all. It only solves a portion of them. So in this case where they're talking about these repositories that don't do the long-term data storage, they can do some of the items. They can have evidence for some of the items in core trust seal, but not all of them. So it takes a collection of those things. So one of the things that this, that I hope that this entire working group does is find ways to take people that do portions of the curation and preservation workflow and assign them or map them to different levels. So for example, if you do use Dataverse could be reviewed. So if you use Dataverse, and then automatically you check off a few of the boxes in the core trust seal, or check a few of the boxes off in Nestor, or check a few of the boxes off in ISO, but you can't get the entire certification. You need to combine that with something else. And from a purely selfish point of view, how that would help the core trust seal is that we won't have to review every single line. We only have to look at the ones that they don't do. So if, for example, a service provider, Dataverse or one others had this review, maybe we don't have to look at every single criteria, because if they use that software and you can verify they use that software or that package, then those are already taken care of. You only review the ones that have not been. So that would speed up this process. One challenge we've had is it takes a long time to get through the review process, and that might speed that up. So that's where I see this question, and I hope that's the right answer.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I saw a couple of Contrast board members in the audience. Do any of you want to comment on it?
Thanks, Carl. I think that's completely right, John. And I think the other side of the equation is something that's come up on some of the EOS work recently on the long-term data preservation task force. Particularly is how you set these preservation services, which we're all not so obsessed but very interested in, within the wider framework of services that we all need. Part of that is the working group that Ingrid outlined, looking at those technical repository service providers. But part of it is also saying there will be different tiers of service. So the core trust seal pushed out a curation and preservation levels paper. There's a discussion paper on that. And the long-term preservation task force is looking at that with a view to getting to the point that we can clearly delineate each of these levels of service. Because yes, I believe in the preservation if the data has sufficient value, and that appraisal and selection thing is hugely important. But that's not to say there aren't other data services at different tiers, for which many of the core trust seal and the trust principles still apply to. And we need to look at how we build a kind of like an integrated infrastructure that includes those different services. And I think that speaks to maybe the other side of that question.
Thanks, Hervé. And for the next question online is from Christina Jama. Like, is anyone else in this group working on implementing an international data space? I'm not sure any audience in the room knows about it. But I think that the comments after that, I think it seems great. Christina, I think I would encourage you to join the working group. I think that sounds like a different perspective to implement the trustworthy data repositories. Okay, so Jeremy, if you we could close that, and then to the question from Devin. Okay, and I think I guess you all see the question, right? So repeat. So can you create ontology of the specific type of improvement to more easily identify what exactly is better when a repository gets certified? That's a very
Yeah.
it's
So
very
I've been doing some
academic
research.
question.
I really think we need something like this because I've been doing research on this for a couple of years, and it was really hard for me to be able to find in the audit report what exactly is getting better. Right? We know that these are good things to do, you know, when we look at each one of the requirements or each one of the guidelines, but like what is, like we need a better way to measure what is getting better as a result of doing it.
Right. I think that's an important aspect, yeah. Give it Ashley.
So, I'm responding to this both as somebody, I've been an auditor for a number of different types of standards like this, and I've been on the other end of it. I've ran repositories and been subjected to a number of these, and others that haven't been mentioned. I think one of the reasons you will find it difficult to find what you're looking for is that the improvements happen before the audit. Basically, if they haven't, you will fail the audit. And it's, so therefore I think actually it would be interesting for somebody to do a study to document this, but it's actually in that, for the formal processes, it's in the self-assessment stage, or it's when you're getting somebody else to help you prepare. And this is true not just of repositories, I think any kind of audit mechanism. It makes you look at what you're doing and think, my God, we should be doing this thing and we aren't. Let's put that in place, let's document these processes before the auditors turn up. Because otherwise this is not going to look good. And almost by its nature, that's happening within the organisation. I mean, yeah, maybe it'd be great to do some research on it, but you'll find it, that's why you find it hard to find the document.
That's right in the heart. I can't.
Maybe I can also, and Joost Bloemen from the KU Leuven, I can sort of comment on that as well, because I'm currently preparing for certification. And it's been really tricky to sort of document everything, because we had a lot of ideas about preservation, how we were going to do it, but it wasn't written down. And once we started writing it down and making it ready for publication on manual and documentation, we realized that some details weren't really working. And I think those are the changes that you make before you even apply for certification. So if you do research into what it actually does, I think it's perhaps most relevant to ask the repositories that have certification what they had to change in order to get the certification, because once you have it, it's already in place, basically. So that's my experience, at least. It's really about finding the errors of your own ways and improving them before you apply for certification.
John, you want to have a comment on that?
Yeah, right quick. One thing that might be an idea, Devin, and of course, all my court trustee board members are going to tell me it's not possible. But the second question here is, do you know to whether and to what extent a self-assessment phase has resulted in changes to get their system certified? We see that all the time. We have multiple versions. Sometimes these applications go through 3 and 4 versions. So Devin, if you could get access to version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, you will see the changes and things that went along the way. And we've seen massive changes from people who start the process and they'll give us an application that they're not even close to being certified. And they didn't do the due diligence like Kevin, you're talking about. They would fail immediately, but that's not how this process works. It's a peer review. So we tell them the things they need to work on. They go back and fix them. And by the end, they have a good application. And that's what you're seeing online. You don't see the changes. So I'm not sure, you know, they may be sensitive and we don't share the versions, and there's lots of reasons around that, but that's
a share failure.
Yeah, that's an issue. I'm sure other folks have other comments, but that's just one.
Yeah, I think Franz Mark have a comment. Now we'll move on to the next question.
I just have an announcement to make. I have been doing in AMRDF France also, and we have a working group on certification, and we have been doing many workshops to support people beginning the process. And we get an idea of what is difficult when we do these things. I would like to announce that we are discussing with other regions who are setting up also support to certification in their communities. And we will try to have a workshop, an online workshop on that, to share, to understand the practices which can be set up to support the community to get to certification. And so this will be in the framework of 10 years of the RDA. And it's just to ask you if we can announce this when it's done, if we can announce on the working, on the interest group side, because I think it can interest, you know, there are also projects like CESDA, for instance, which have their own support. And I think it can interest a certain number of stakeholders to have this kind of information. Sorry for stealing this 2 minutes to you.
Great. Is there a quick comment on
Yes,
all of that?
it's a quick comment. So, Pedro Prince from Portugal. So the process is quite important here in the compliance with the cultural seal. I just want to share that what I did in my team, because we are applying now, it was to use this application process and the preparation process as to build capacity in my team. So I involve everyone working together, replying to building the policies, putting the information in the website about our data repository, and this was really a moment for capacity building in the team involved.
Yeah, that's great to know that. I think next question is also probably for cultural seal. How do you ensure the cultural seal remains relevant enough to the cultural heritage institutions? And there's a fear that the criteria being watered down. I don't know if any cultural seal board member want to answer that.
It's getting more and more difficult, so I don't think anything is watered down.
So I can make a couple comments if you like. So this is where me personally think there's 16 requirements, but there's an R0. And R0 is where you explain exactly what your repository is, who your designated community are, what the things they need. And from that, the reviewers, if they do the job they should do, is make decisions. If it's a cultural heritage organization, then they'll know in that community what are the things you should see in the other 16. Some of which are, do they have the qualified personnel in their organization to do things appropriately for the cultural heritage? So while the core of Core Trust Seal does limit it to non-specific domains, the whole idea is that R0 explains the environment that your repository is working in, and all of the requirements must fit for that discipline and for those people. If you say you're a cultural heritage organization, along with that come the things that designated community need. And if you don't do that within the 16 requirements, you should not pass. It's not, they don't get watered down because it depends upon your actual discipline. And that's why I approach looking at these, that the core can be, I mentioned earlier, we used to have in the tool a non-applicable. To me, that doesn't exist. There's always an applicable for your domain and for your discipline. There's somewhere that it fits. You just need to look at it, and the reviewers need to take the due diligence and time to do that.
For the next question, Mary, I don't know, like Olivia, because I don't want to put it on the spot, but do you want to answer the next question? Please. Do you know whether or to what extent the self-assessment phase has resulted in the repository making changes to the system?
Okay, thank you. I think we've already heard a lot of testimonies here about that, but I can just tell that I've worked with several repositories in projects like EOS Nordic and SHOP and CESDA Trust, where we have supported repositories, and yeah, it's true that many repositories do actually improve a lot during the self-assessment phase, and it's mostly been about the documentation, because Core Trust Seal won't tell you which system to use or which technology to use. The other thing we see is that clarifying the responsibilities, that usually happens during the self-assessment phase. So I very much encourage everybody who is considering Core Trust Seal application to seek these networks and other repositories that are doing the same and discussing with them, and I think that's yeah.
That sounds good. I think the next question is yeah, I think it is. There's a acronym fatigue. I think that's why I think we kind of have such a big community, really kind of think about the user trust principle as a way to organize the trustworthy repository group. Maybe I think after this we'll have the last question, and then we can go on to the closing, and then we can continue to discuss. So the next question is how to go through the in and out of the scope triad process before applying for the certification.
I'm happy to mention it. I hate to take up all the air in the room. So this is an evolving process. So we began by, on the Core Trust Seal website, putting an FAQ that talks about in scope, out of scope. We had a lot of questions. People would send us emails, and we created some documentation online. But now we have a much more formal process where we do have a consistency officer. So when you submit your application, the first person who looks at it is a consistency officer, and that person will make a determination of whether it's obviously in scope and it moves forward, or it is something that we need to discuss and either go back to the applicant or talk to the board. We're actively working on those workflows. We actually have a meeting tomorrow to talk about some of these workflows because they're very new, but that's what we're trying to do is the triage. So on the website, you'll see some stuff about in scope and out of scope, but we are working on a workflow to try to speed up that process and shepherd these things through in a more scalable fashion. I saw someone ask earlier a question, was it scalable? And for those of us sitting in the trenches, we worry about scalability a lot because we get a lot of applications and not very many reviewers. But we're looking to work to speed things up, to make it much more efficient, as well as find a way to reward these reviewers somehow, some sort of incentive system, become a reviewer so we can get more and more reviewers. So we are working on that. We know it's a challenge and we're working towards that.
Thanks, John. So now we want to take advantage of the technology to let Meredith close the session from Paris.
Thank you, Dawe, and thank you everybody for your excellent comments, suggestions, questions, and engagement. So what's next? Your input is very important today and tomorrow and through April 7th before our application goes to tab. What do we want to do? We want to understand what the hindrances are to trust adoption and how we can move that forward. We want to clarify, and we talked about the trust to care and to fair. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Thank you, Mickey. So let's keep figuring out.
Okay, good. That's perfect.
Acting those. We're going to map those out. And let's see if we can figure out how we can work together on this. Go ahead and sign up for the listserv and engage with us. And I hope to see you at our meeting in April. And feel free to reach out and have a great time in and see you in Salzburg at P21 again.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Is Meredith still online? Is
What?
Meredith still online?
Hi, Claudia.
Hi.
I'm here, Claudia.
I was sending a message, I miss you, but now I don't need to.
Sorry, I can't be there.
Hi.
Yes, absolutely. Always.
Just to say
Talk
hi.
soon.
See you in Salzburg.
Enjoy.
Hi. So can we just like
Take care, everyone.
It's not like we want to go to when it goes to
okay, good. I know. Okay. Not yet. I see. Yeah. Yeah. Also the trust of my abstract from the country. Yeah.
So at some point, finishing that phase of work now, and I'll share because that's sort of already taking some theme. But these criteria are the same.
Yeah.
If one can then start adding this to the same framework formally,
Yeah,
very
yeah.
easily identify.
I think that would be great because like right now I think it's most times like people just endorse like practice and not talking about other.
We will correct it. You will no better reason
how they can identify the shared values.
Stick my neck out and really talk, but what's actually needed to is some kind of communication. I started writing saying that these sets of
Okay, all right, that'd be great.